This morning, we're going to be looking at Proverbs chapter 31. And like I said, I went back and looked out of curiosity about when I have preached Mother's Day sermons and when I haven't. And something I noticed that I was a little surprised by was, at least here in Ada, I didn't go back to Oregon days to look, I have never preached on Proverbs 31. And I'm not really sure why that is, but I would imagine one of the reasons, at least subconsciously in my mind, is what this chapter does to women sometimes. Where you will look, I already see nodding heads, where you will look at this chapter, and if you're not familiar, by the way, we're gonna read most of it this morning. If you look at it, it seems kind of like this just unattainable thing. And for a lot of you, you probably have someone in your lives that is kind of like that, where maybe you look at, if you're a woman, if you look at your mother or grandmother or somewhere back down the road, or someone from church that you respect or someone that you've known. But men have a version of this too, where there are these things that you know people and you just never feel like you can quite measure up to who they are. And if we were to look at Proverbs 31 of a list where we should print it out and put little check boxes next to it, and as we get those things, check them off, you will find yourself feeling very inadequate very quickly. And I think this is explained really well in the Expositor's Bible Commentary. He references a couple different commentators that have talked about it, but he talks about the idea of what this chapter is not. And I think it's a good place for us to start, just to maybe put our minds at ease this morning. And one other thing before we mention what this chapter is not, if you are male here this morning, please don't tune this out. I'm saving it for the very end, but spoiler alert, this is not just about women. This chapter has something to do that is greater than women. If you read through the book of Proverbs, what you find is that wisdom, many times throughout the book, is referred to as a woman or in female words that are used. And so we're going to be looking quite a bit at what it's like to be a wise person in the eyes of God. But what this chapter is not, and the Bible commentary says this. Kidner, who is Derek Kidner, a Bible scholar that's written another commentary on this book, he allows that this lady's standard is not implied to be in reach of all, but rather reveals the flowering of wisdom in domestic life. So there's going to be things about who she is that maybe you get one of them here or one of them there, but to be all of these things is going to be pretty close to being perfect, and it's kind of hard to get there. Then Kenneth Aitken, who also wrote a book on Proverbs, likewise affirms that as a whole it cannot be read as a kind of blueprint of the ideal Israelite housewife, either for men to measure their wives against or for their wives to try to live up to. Men, husbands among us, let me give you a little helpful piece of advice. Don't pick a verse out of here and say to your wife, you should do this better. You should be more like this. I hope that none of us would ever think to do something like that. But if we were to take this either as a woman and try to be this exactly, or as a man to take this and say, man, my wife should be more like this. It's biblical. It's right there. She should do these things. It's neither of those things. Moreover, the work says nothing about the woman's personal relationship with her husband, her intellectual or emotional strengths, or her religious activities. So there are a lot of things it doesn't speak to. I feel like here, the wise man writing Proverbs, I can kind of associate with a little bit, because sometimes I'll preach a sermon and someone will say, you should have said. And I will think to myself, yes, that actually probably would have been a good idea. That would have fit in, but there's only so many things I can say. People like overtime in games, but not in sermons for some reason. So I can't say it all. And so the wise man is not trying to say everything that can be said here. Doesn't talk about spiritual things, lots of other kinds of things he could, but what he talks about is very important. So in Proverbs chapter 31, we're going to start in verse 10. The beginning of the chapter, if you want to read backwards and see, is a lot about what this man, the son, should not be looking toward. We won't look as much as those. But what we will see about the wise woman. So an excellent wife, who can find? So a lot of times, this gets applied to the idea of just wives. It's important for us to realize that in the Hebrew, as this is written, it can be interpreted as wives, but could just also be interpreted as women. And the reason why I call this a woman of strength is an excellent wife could also be interpreted a strong woman. So what does a woman of strength look like? And this is what he will describe throughout the rest of the chapter. So as we continue that verse, an excellent wife who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. And there are a lot of ways we could look at that verse, but the way I see it at least is she is rare. If we're to look around our world today, there are an awful lot of women in our world, and there are very good ones and ones that are not so great. An excellent one is kind of difficult to find. And so, as this advice is given, we have to be choosy about the people with whom we keep company. And so, if she is rare, she is difficult to find, more precious than jewels, this is something we are wanting to strive for as people. We want to be not just the average person, we want to be better and to do better. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. So she is rare, but she is also trustworthy. So she is one that you can tell the things you need to confide into and know that they will not go any further. She is one that you know you can count on. This woman of strength is one who is trustworthy. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. I'm going to assume we've not sought a lot of wool and flax yet this morning, so this is one of those first places where we probably fall a little bit short. It's the imagery that is much more relevant probably in their day and time than to maybe ours. I found myself in the craft section at Walmart yesterday. Don't ask why. But I found myself in the craft section looking at all these different things and thinking I wouldn't even know where to begin, what to do with half of the stuff that I'm looking at. And maybe you feel the same way. But as this woman is described, she seeks wool and flax. She is like ships of the merchant, and she brings her food from afar. And all this is to say, she makes things better. And maybe there are a lot of things we could strive for this morning, but again, as we don't make this just about women, this is about people who are wise. Maybe this is one of the big takeaways for us today. What if we could just make the situations we are in, the people we are around, the places we go, our workplaces, our homes, our church family, what if our role in those places was just to make them better? And sometimes that comes naturally, doesn't it? We sitting here during the singing of the various songs, I love singing the songs, I love the words of the songs. At the same time, I love the occasional sound of some baby making a noise or of a child saying something to a parent. And I love all of that, and it to me makes our church family better when I hear those things. There are those of you I will run into, and you will have a smiling face and an encouraging word, and you make things better. She is one who makes things better, and I will let you in on a little something. All of us have the ability to do this. You all have people in your lives that stand out who are this, but there is no reason that each one of us cannot do this. You come into something, a situation that you're in, and you have the option of going one way or the other, making things better or making things worse. Appreciated David's words this morning in class about burning anger. It's biblical, by the way, but in the Old Testament, not the New. There was this burning anger that was going on, and I thought, there are a lot of times that people bring burning anger to a situation, aren't there? Instead of making things better. And sometimes that seems like the justifiable way to react. And yet for us, what are we going to do? And so this wise woman, this woman of strength, makes things better. Verse 15 says, she rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hand, she plants a vineyard. So she is one who makes good use of time. You ever caught yourself saying, I wish I had more time? Don't have enough time to do these things? I think you will find very quickly that most of us are pretty good at wasting time somewhere along the way. Or most of us are good at using time in such a way that maybe not the most profitable thing is happening and the best thing that we could do. I found myself a night ago, like many of you, and maybe you saw this later online, the Northern Lights. Don't usually come this far south. That's why they're called the Northern Lights. But if you were in the right place at the right time, you could see them. I went out in my backyard, and I was kind of like, that kind of looks different. I'm not quite sure. I put my camera up and used the night sight magic that's on it and took a picture. And lo and behold, there is all this glow there, this pink and green, these colors. And I thought, I really want to stay up longer and to see more of this and to see if it gets better, but I'm just so tired. I just want to go to bed. Or in the morning when you wake up and that alarm goes off and you're not ready, you don't want to get up. We all have time that we're using for different reasons and doing different things. Have you ever told yourself you don't have enough time to pray more than you do? You don't have enough time to read more scripture? You don't have enough time to do good things for others? We all have time. And what we read about this woman in Proverbs 31 is that she sees the time that is there and she gets up early. And she does other things that are important and good because she is making good use of time. I would challenge you the next time you catch yourself saying, I wish I had more time, stop and think about it. Stop and think about, well, where could I find that time? Because for some reason, other people are, and they have the same number of hours that you and I have, and yet they're doing these things. Continue on, verse 17. She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. So she is, well, that's the wrong thing. Oh, I'm sorry, that is the right thing. She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. So she is working. She is a hard worker. It's all about strength with her. And to go a step beyond, and we'll see more of this later in the chapter, it's also about, it's not a vain thing. She is not one that is overly concerned with the outward. She is dressing herself with strength. Now, I know it's dangerous to say that on Mother's Day when everybody looks nice. I even wore a tie today. And so we're all kind of dressing nice and doing those things. And yet she sees that there is something that goes deeper than that. And so she is one that in the things she does, she is going to work hard at it. And this is different for each of us. This, again, as we think of the beginning of this chapter and the idea of this not being a blueprint or a checklist of what we're supposed to do, the way you work hard does not look the same way that someone else works hard. If you are a woman among us, or whoever among us, and you have a job and you work all day and things are difficult, and you get home and you think to yourself, you know, my mother and my grandmother, they did all of these things and dinner was on the table and all of that. It doesn't all have to be the same hard work. We all work hard in different kinds of ways. You do so many things in your life. Don't beat yourself up over it. And yet at the same time, let's be people who are working diligently, working hard. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. So she is prepared. She sees what she has to work with. She doesn't let the lamp go out at night. She is one who is getting ready for what is happening and what needs to be done. So maybe part of our I don't have enough time is, am I preparing the time that I have? Am I doing things in such a way that I will be able to do the things that I want to do? Am I thinking ahead about how is this going to work? What plans do I need to make this happen? She is one who prepares. She puts her hands, verse 19, to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. So she is generous. It's not all about, and it seems like so much of this is about the marketplace and selling and making and all of that stuff, but yet there is a piece of that is, what am I giving? As the trays go by, it's such a weird time in the world in which we live now. The trays go by sometimes and they'll get to you and they're empty and you'll think, what's going on here? There is online giving now. There's a ton of it, by the way. And so sometimes the trays as they go by are not filling up the way they once did, and yet those numbers all stay the same. Are we preparing? Are we planning to give when it comes to church? Or beyond that, when we see people around us who are in need, are we generous? Is our first inclination to say no to everything that comes along the way? And I will tell you, by the way, guilty sometimes. I don't always like to give to folks that I don't know what the situation is or have all the reasons not to, or surely this is not honest or whatever it may be. I can be there sometimes. And yet, do I still need to be a generous person? Because there are so many good things that we can do with the things that God has blessed us with. So she is one who is generous. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. So she also cares for those that she loves. And this is probably the most obvious for those of us who are here this morning, is the motherly instinct that we understand so well and we read about in Scripture and we see in our families and our lives. She is one who cares for the people she loves. And again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, Mother's Day is a two-sided coin, if not more than that. There are those who this is a blessing and a wonderful day, and there are those who it's a struggle because of loss, but sometimes there are those who it's a struggle because mom in your family was not good. Mom in your family was some where all the memories there are difficult ones, not good ones. And let me say that as we read through this, you have a choice with that. Do you become something different than that, or do you carry that on? Do you remain bitter about that And I'm not trying to discount it. I get it. It's a big thing. It's difficult to deal with. But do we let that motivate us to be better than that? So she is one, here in Proverbs 31, who cares. She's not concerned about the cold that comes because she knows she has given her family what they need to deal with the cold as it comes. She makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchant. So she is one who is resourceful. She sees her talents, she sees her skills, she sees the things that she has, and she is able to make something of that and do something with that. And again, this is a place where we struggle sometimes because we live in a land where there's an awful lot of talk about rich and poor and who is wealthy and who is not. And yet, if you were to drop us on another continent, in another place, all of us would be among the wealthiest people there. Every last one of us. And it's hard for us to wrap our heads around that, but we all have something. We all come here with things and resources, and what use are we making of those things as we go along? And it kind of ties back in a couple points back to generosity. Are we using things well? Are we thankful for the things that God has given us? Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. So she is, as we mentioned before, as she clothes herself with strength, she is not vain. It is not about the outward. Now, I'm not here to harp on all of the outward things that happen in our world today and all the things that people buy to look better and all the ways that people try to do those things, as long as we are of the understanding that it is not all about that. We are, for the most part, all going to live and get older, and we are not going to look like we once did long, long ago. We will see pictures of our younger selves, and we will think, what happened? This is not what it used to be like. We will see ourselves when we are not put together. We will get up in the morning and look in the mirror and think, this is not who I was. Everything has changed. I was talking to Mark Coleman the other day, who was saying something about the gray that I had, and I had all kinds of comeback lines to Mark, but I didn't use any of them. But he was saying something about the gray I had, and I said, well, you know, one of these days I'll shave this thing off, and a lot of it will go away. And he said, I hate to tell you this, but there will still be gray. Thanks, Mark. You know, we get so caught up sometimes in the outward that we forget. That scripture that Brett alluded to earlier, Brad came from, that Brad alluded to earlier, it was not his appearance that drew people to him. It was who he was. It was how he lived. And for us, God calls us to the same thing. Clothe ourselves in strength and in dignity, and let those be the things that speak much more than how we look or the things that people see on the outside. Verse 26, she opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She uses words well. In so many of the things that we do, they kind of come back here, don't they? Because the words betray us. Those things that are within our hearts, they come out of our mouths and we say them. She is one who is cautious with the things that she said. She is cautious with how she treats others, and she is kind with her words. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. People notice this kind of life, don't they? The children rise up, the husband sees it, people around see it. When you live this way, it is noticeable. And it is being that light on the hill that Jesus talks about on the sermon, the city on the hill, the light that can't be hidden that he talks about in the Sermon on the Mount. We live in such a way that people can see him in us, that people want to know more about the God who we serve. Verse 30, the verse we read as we started this morning, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. There is a psalm that parallels an awful lot of this chapter. And one of the main focuses of that psalm, I think it's Psalm 111 if I remember right, one of the main focuses of that psalm is the idea of the fear of the Lord. The one who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. She knows what matters. It all comes back to God. And even though the commentator that we read about earlier says this is not about spiritual life, it's almost like the book of Esther where God is not mentioned and yet it's all about God. The spiritual life is not really mentioned in Proverbs 31, and yet isn't it all kind of about the spiritual life? because it's all built on the fear of the Lord. It's the foundation on which it is all built. And so this is a woman of strength who is all of these things, and yet at the same time, as we see throughout the book of Proverbs, it is a wise person who is all these things. A wise person is rare. A wise person is trustworthy. Isn't it hard to find someone to trust nowadays? A wise person makes things better, and you have the option to do either. A wise person makes good use of their time, and maybe find yourself less and less saying, I wish I had more time, because you're making good use of the time that you have. A wise person is a hard worker. Why put yourself in a spot where you're scrambling to get it all to happen and come together when you could work hard all along the way? A wise person is prepared. Don't go into a situation not being ready. Be prepared. A wise person is generous, because all of this that we have, we're going to die someday, and we don't get to take it with us. So why not give and bless others along the way? A wise person cares for those she loves or he loves. Those people that we care about, we should show that in how we act toward them. A wise person is resourceful. Whatever God has given you, and there are wealthy and poor, at least in the American sense, among us, make use of what God has given you in a wise way. A wise person is not vain. All of the outward things, all of the things we get concerned about, they all go away at some point. A wise person uses words well. You will say a lot of words today, hopefully not as many as me. You'll say a lot of words today. Use them well. Are you going to use them to build up, to tear down, to show love, to show frustration? A wise person, when you live this way, people are going to notice this life and want to know why, because you know what matters. And this morning, if you have never followed God, He is not one that has created for you an impossible checklist in Proverbs chapter 31. Instead, He has shown you, what does wisdom look like lived out? And that wisdom begins, as we read about in verse 30, with the fear of the Lord. And the fear of the Lord for us, it's not being afraid. It is a respect for knowing who He is, a respect for understanding what He can do in our lives, and that drives us to the waters that are behind me. And you be baptized into Him today, you can begin to walk in wise ways, and your life can be changed. Or if you have walked away from that, make the wise choice this morning to come back. You can follow Him again. If there's some way we can help you, one of our elders and his wife will be in the back, or you can come down front here as together we stand and as we sing.